It seems like every year my arms keep improving, which is crazy because I used to be known for having a torso-dominant physique. For years, they were stuck at 16 inches regardless of body fat. Even when I bulked, I couldn't get past 16.5 inches. The first time I hit 17 inches, which I'm still proud of given my height of 5'5", was in 2022. But I was also 200 pounds, so naturally when you cut, you lose much of that size. So the following year, I continued getting stronger and acquired 17.25 inches in the high 180s. Then in 2024, I measured the same arm size at 181, right when I benched 4 plates again. Then I decided to cut this year, in which I managed to keep 17 inches at only 173 pounds, which means that within 3 years, I maintained my peak bulked arm measurement at a moderate body fat of around 15%, not 20%. Then, after losing another 15 pounds, my arms looked leaner and fuller at the old 16 inches, which is where they used to hover at a normal body fat. So even if someone says, oh, you're still at 16 inches, it's a more impressive arm because there's less fat, more vascularity, more separation. Like they just look better, you see it, and most importantly, my arms are stronger. They're the strongest they've ever been pound for pound. On straight bar curls, my all-time best was 135 for 6 reps at 160. And I can also do 5 one-arm pull-ups at 162, which says a lot about brute arm force. Also, when my arms were 17.25 inches, I was doing JM presses with 205 for reps. Now, I'm over 20 pounds lighter and I'm doing 230 for reps while dipping 4 plates for 8 reps with controlled, perfect form after heavy benching. And most importantly, when I briefly got shredded, I managed to bench my previous max with chains and no elbow sleeves. So there was progress, which you can clearly see when I train and flex. And that's why I keep getting comments like, wow, you finally don't look torso dominant anymore. So I think I've learned a thing or two about arm training, and that's exactly what I want to share with you now. This is going to be a very simple video, and I'll try to keep it to the point. First of all, let's get this out of the way. The training split itself does not matter. The first time I got 17 inches, it was on an upper-lower split. When I got 17.25, it was a Jordan Peters push-pull-off, legs-off repeat split. And last year and a half, where I hit the same number, I've also done upper-lower 3 days a week, upper-lower push-pull, a torso and limbs hybrid, and believe it or not, a 5-day bro split. Across all these splits, my arm gains were exactly the same. So what really mattered and stayed 100% consistent was the frequency and volume, which has been very similar since October of 2022. There is a template to follow. In my experience, you ideally want 2 isolation exercises for biceps and 2 isolation exercises for triceps, done twice a week, always spaced 72 hours apart for optimal elbow and tendon recovery. And 2 sets per exercise are sufficient, thus totaling 8 sets of direct arm work per week. And these should be hard sets, always training at 0 to 1 reps in reserve, making faces like you're about to explode. Now you can leave a rep in the tank on the first set and go to failure on the last set, or go to failure on both sets, which is not systemically taxing on arm isolations. In addition, you want 2 pairs of exercises for variety, which minimizes overuse and makes progression a little smoother, especially when your numbers are quite up there. While of course biasing different parts of the arms and blending everything that you need for maximum strength and size gains. Remember, I'm not just a bodybuilder. So day 1 for biceps is usually a hammer curl, then a barbell curl. And for triceps, a bar push down, then a JM press. Day 2 for biceps is usually a preacher curl, then a cable floor curl, and for triceps, a different push down, then an extension to hit the long head. Now on an arm day or push-pull day, I will also finish triceps with dips, and I'll finish biceps with chin-ups, treating them as the 3rd arm slot as if it were an isolation exercise. I'll explain this more later, but it just makes calisthenics more arm dominant. So that's my arm training formula, which can fit into any split. Follow this with variations mixed in and see what happens in a year, because growing your arms takes time. As a seasoned lifter, you might only gain a quarter of an inch per year, or even less, as is the case in myself. So now, let's cover biceps and triceps independently, talking more about specific exercise selection and training methods that really help me. I'll start with biceps since I feel they improve the most, and I have more information to offer. Here's a pro tip for biceps. If your back is a dominant body part, as in you're brutally strong at rows and pull-ups, but proportionally way weaker at curls, then consider starting your workouts with biceps, including on pull days. It doesn't ravage your strength on compounds like you might think. It simply pre-exhausts them so that your biceps hit a higher proximity of failure on pulls. So whenever I have an upper body day, I typically start with 2 curls, training the biceps while they're fresh with 0 fatigue. Whereas most lifters end their long upper body workouts with biceps, which, let's be honest, usually comes with low intensity and uncoordinated form. So starting with strong arms maximizes motor unit recruitment, which lets you hit them with 100% effort and makes free weights far more appealing. You will not run away from the harder exercises. Even if you do bench press right after, it won't affect performance. And if structured correctly, like doing curls first, then bench presses and overhead presses, followed by pulling compounds, you have enough recovery and aren't significantly weaker on your pulling exercises. So I can still do chin-ups with at least 2 plates for reps, even if I isolated my biceps first. So exercise order within the session absolutely matters. And by the way, I would not alternate push-pull if you're opening with arms. For upper body days with bicep specialization, I personally do 2 curls first, then presses, then pulls, and finish with triceps isolations. For tricep specialization, I start with 2 triceps isolations, then pulls, then presses, then biceps. So it's the inverse order of compounds. This works very well for a complete arm specialization phase, where the first day is biceps focused and the second day is triceps focused. Another strategy is finishing with arm biased compounds, which works best on an arm day, but can also be used on other days. For example, after curls, finishing with chin-ups makes the biceps a limiting factor because they're badly fatigued, placing them at a higher proximity of failure than normal. This is my default now, which funny enough, Leroy Colbert did the same thing in his final elite arm workout, always finishing with weighted chin-ups. I've been doing the same for months, and it's improved my top end strength and one-arm pull-ups. So it's an efficient way to get a high stimulus without overloading. So this is great if you're strong and you also want to minimize golfer's elbow. You can use a bar and rings, but ideally you should alternate between the two. Even doing archer ring chin-ups or jumping chin-ups can be super effective here. The point is, end your workouts with some kind of chin-up after biceps isolation rather than starting them, which is the typical order. Flip it around. Or if you're following a normal back day, you could also do neutral grip pull-ups, then wide grip pull-ups in rows, then curls, then chin-ups. So you're kind of mixing in a compound, then an isolation, then a compound again. Again, this is specifically for guys who want bigger biceps. And using the chin-ups for biceps, not necessarily your back, even though it'll still contribute. Now, one thing to note about vertical pulls is that using an underhand grip works the biceps from the elbow and the shoulder, thus contracting the muscle more uniformly from both ends, as Mike Mentzer used to say. That said, what people don't realize that super wide grip pull-ups also hit the biceps harder through the resultant pulling force at the elbow. That's why street lifters often tear their biceps on wide grip chin-ups, because it amplifies both conditions, the supination and the wide grip. It's incredible, but not the safest option, and thus should not be your main builder unless you're elite and really have stubborn biceps. So the safer approach is to do an underhand pull down or chin-ups in addition to super wide. So you hit the biceps in the best way possible from vertical pulls. It also makes it less redundant for your overall back training, so it's a double win on that end. And in general, favoring an underhand grip serves you well. I did that for all of 2024. For a full year, I didn't do much pronated pulls, except for behind the neck pull-ups. The majority of my pulling exercises were underhand, including rows. So it's worth trying if your back will still grow the same based off your experience. So you might as well increase the proximity of failure in your biceps. Now let's talk about curls, which will drive the majority of your biceps gains. I keep exercise selection basic because the bicep is not a complicated muscle. Many lifters get distracted with fancy curls when it's not necessary. The biceps flexes the elbow, supinates the forearms, and can assist in shoulder flexion. But at the end of the day, you simply curl on a variation that you can meaningfully progress on. For me, I favor the most classic, time-proven option, the standing barbell curl. Now, some optimal bros will argue that barbell curls aren't stable because as the weight gets closer to your body weight, it could throw off your center of mass. That somewhat applies, but with very minor sway, leaning forward at the bottom and back as you curl up completely solves that problem and actually makes for a smooth movement pattern. It's not the same as curling under 100 pounds, but it's stable enough. And besides, anyone who achieves a 135 barbell curl for reps, which is realistic, will already have big biceps. So even if that's when they randomly plateau or progress slows down, which is to be expected regardless because we're hitting very heavy weights here, it doesn't matter. You won the game and therefore didn't need much else. Even getting a bit under that will still take you very far. Not to mention that for most lifters, it's not even unstable unless you literally weigh the same as what you're curling. Just to say, if I can curl 135 at single digit body fat and weigh 160, only 25 pounds off, then by default, average or heavier guys should never have a problem. And if they somehow do, they're just weak or making excuses. That is the truth. So don't blame your lack of results on stability. Regarding the straight bar, there's a lot of talk about the carrying angle and individual wideness and how the easy bar works the biceps similarly. But for those with bad biceps genetics, I still believe the straight bar might be marginally better, simply because it allows for full supination. Semi-supinated movements can bias the brachialis, in which case I'd rather just do a hammer curl. I want both extremes, not the middle ground, as my default bilateral curl. Similar to my thought process on pull-ups. But that's just my opinion, and of course, I still mix in both bars to reduce overuse. You should too. But treat the straight bar as your competition grip, if you will. Because the easy bar is mechanically easier, but it can also minimize elbow overuse. So it definitely has its benefits. So the first goal should be surpassing the preset bars at the gym. An end goal should be hitting 135. Even 4 reps per set in the bare minimum of the volume range is perfect. And by the way, I typically do 2 sets of 4 to 6 reps on barbell curls. And I slowly microload the weight or I slightly improve technique. So it's always getting cleaner and stronger with time. But that's a good standard. And it's what I needed to get these gains. Even at 115, it wasn't quite enough. So barbell curls hit the biceps in the mid-range, which is very productive. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It's good if you're mixing incline curls on another day. Sometimes we don't want to double down on the stretch to reduce muscle damage, okay? Plus it has incredible progression potential, arguably the best out of any other free weight curl. So I value that above all else. And it's stable enough and anyone can do them. Perfect for my home gym bros in a world where machines are hogged and bars are up for grabs. Plus, they were a favorite among silver era bodybuilders. And as I point out in this video, we haven't really seen tremendous improvements in decades, either in the natty or enhanced world, precisely because the biceps are such a simple muscle. So the outliers just have superior genetics rather than superior arm training. It's not that they needed this one special curl. Now, are barbell preacher curls superior? Probably, if you're strong, because of extra stability and hitting the length position more. But I also recommend dumbbell preacher curls, so that's taken care of. Plus, many guys do not have a preacher bench, or at least a good one, but everyone has an adjustable bench. That said, on days I skip barbell curls because loading a plate can actually be intimidating, or you don't feel like ending your workout with them because of fatigue or some other reason, I do cable floor curls instead. They're an ideal finisher or if you want to push super hard. I find them similarly effective as barbell curls, and in my opinion, better than strict curls against the wall, and they're really fast to do. They're easy to get into the starting position, stable through a full range of motion with the head, back, butt, and foot support, and allow for unmatched grinding with added tension in the bottom. I think they're one of the most underrated curls, and I first learned about them from Greg Plitt about 10 years ago, but only revisited them this year. Now they're a staple for myself and for many of my clients. Interestingly, even though motor unit recruitment is maximized, you'll still lift less than a barbell curl by about 25 pounds, or the same as your strict curl against the wall. So they're very much interchangeable. They're also just as stable as preacher curls. So that's never going to be a problem because there's no center of mass to overcome. So try it out, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. As for my second favorite curl, I found that super heavy hammer curls are one of the better dumbbell curls. They improve your compounds and also bias the brachialis, which pushes the biceps out, which you can actually see when you're lean, which makes a big difference in how your overall arm looks. Now you're still performing elbow flexion, which is the primary function of the biceps, and thus you are recruiting them. Don't forget it. Similar to what I said earlier about the easy curl bar, but now you can lift heavier than any other dumbbell curl and push intensity to the limit with no more twisting getting in the way. You'd be surprised that when you're moving the dumbbells out in space like that, it reduces your strength potential. So I like to hit both arms simultaneously until technical failure, and then I'll alternate sides until 100% momentary muscular failure. And I'll tell you, one set will have you screaming on multiple reps, but you should still push for a second set. Reps-wise, I usually won't go higher than 16 to 20 total. For reference, I built up to 70-pound hammer curls for higher reps, and the form is not bad. It's not completely strict, but it matches the total weight of my barbell curl, so I know it's reasonable. I also prefer standing because you can lean a bit to the side, which suits a wider structure. This is when you do the alternating. Now, if you don't want to quite overload as much, fat handles can reduce the weight by 10 pounds, to which you'll lift similar weights to your normal alternate curl. And just so you know, I used to favor those, especially last year, and I got up to 60 pounds. But I inevitably switched them out for hammer curls for one simple reason. With bulky dumbbells, twisting was cumbersome and uncoordinated. So hammer curls let my arms sit naturally by their sides, just staying there the whole time. Whereas with the normal alternate curl, I found myself really leaning to the side and having to do this awkward twisting. It looked more like chicken flapping, if you will. And so hammer curls were easier on the elbows and warmed them up for more restrictive curls that I would do later. Plus, it blends better overall, and it's less redundant since I'm still hitting the mid-range. Also, if the brachialis was pre-exhausted, maybe that could allow me to dig deeper into my biceps on the next curl. But who knows? That's what John Meadows used to say. Also, hammer curls assist your bench press, of all things, by building the brachialis and brachioradialis, which in the bottom of a bench or JM press improves that squishiness effect. So you're more stable as if you have natural elbow sleeves on. You can make the case that this minimizes tennis elbow. And of course, this was my main variation during the 4-5 bench journey, combining hammer curls and Bayesian curls. I really didn't do any other curls for months. On that note, I eventually stopped doing Bayesian curls, aka behind the back cable curls, because past a certain weight, they became incredibly unstable. Which is super ironic because optimal bros will make that argument against free weighted curls, when this is infinitely worse. So the only solution was back support, which is very annoying to set up, and in many cases, not practical to do, at least perfectly. So I switched to doing them with my back against the cable post, which provided a similar resistance profile to mid-range curls. I milked them for a little bit, but at that point, you might as well just do regular incline dumbbell curls if you want to stretch your biceps with your arms behind your body. And for that, I recommend a slower tempo, as it's easier on the biceps tendons and is just as effective. You don't need to throw around the 50s. Honestly, 35 pounds with textbook form is probably more than enough. So move slowly in both directions, pause at the top, and on the negative, reach the dumbbells away from you while keeping the elbows fixed. And when I do incline curls, which are part of my rotation, usually swapping the hammer curls, I always do them before preacher curls, which are also a staple in my training. So let's talk about them briefly. For preacher curls, I exclusively use dumbbells on an adjustable bench, to which I've worked up to 60 pounds off a 45-degree angle for reps, which was heavy, but manageable. That said, these days I prefer 60 degrees, just one notch higher, as it's significantly harder. The higher angle worsens your leverages, so I dropped back down to 50 pounds, which provided a better stimulus to fatigue ratio. You're also less hunched forward and can't rock it back like an arm wrestler, so it's stricter by default. Plus, I found your arms can get a tad bit longer in the bottom. The 60 degrees almost makes it feel like the bench is rounded, if that makes sense. And in general, one arm at a time can increase motor unit recruitment, and you can adjust your body angle perfectly to make it the most joint friendly and stable. Because with the bilateral version, you're kind of locked into one style. Now you can lean sideways and away. You can get so dialed in to fit your structure perfectly and just be able to grind super hard. So it usually feels better in the bottom and you can really reach your way. So that's why I prefer dumbbell over barbell preacher curls. Plus you can sell spot for beyond failure techniques. Lastly, mixing in the preacher hammer version creates a stable, strict hammer curl. So if you dislike the cheaty style of heavy hammer curls, doing them the preacher way is the best alternative. The best part is, on an adjustable bench, when the plate is fully flat, you still get full range of motion. See, with a supinated grip, the dumbbell plate can hit the bench first, thus turning it into a minor partial, which I don't mind. The arm is still going to be mostly straight, but not all the way. Whereas the hammer version mimics a real preacher bench in terms of range of motion. And it's safer for your bicep tendon because you have that neutral grip. And it's naturally standardized, making it as good, if not better, than normal hammer curls and preacher curls. The only drawback is having to alternate sides. But it's worth it. So that's really about it for biceps. There is a synergy of exercise order with compounds and isolations all feeding into each other. You really don't need anything else. Now let's move on to triceps. Mine didn't improve as much because I'm closer to my pressing potential, whereas for biceps, I can still aim for something like a 1x bodyweight strict curl. Now, my triceps are stronger, but honestly not that much compared to 2 years ago. The main progress came from the overall time factor, not necessarily specific interventions. My programming was already on point. And when you can do a 375 floor press with 30 pounds of chains, a 4-plate dip for 12 reps, and a 315 incline with 30 pounds of chains, your triceps are already strong. So at that point, it's really just the isolations that have the most room for improvement. So let's talk about them. First is my basic triceps push down. The strongest I ever got was 115 pounds on a 1-to-1 pulley using a V-bar, which is equivalent to 230 at the gym. Form was decent, but not perfect. There was some shoulder raising, flared elbows, and the weight kept drifting forward, so it wasn't 100% triceps. Plus, lifting that heavy is harder on the elbows and it's mentally taxing, which eventually led me to the ultra strict version that I do now. That is my default base variation. You can use an easy bar or V-bar, but I much prefer a straight bar with a medium grip. Arms tucked in, elbows pointing back, and dragging the attachment along your body like a Romanian deadlift. Slowly move for 3 to 5 seconds, pausing at the top, keeping the bar from drifting forward, locking down the shoulders, and isolating the triceps. You should look like a tiger ready to pounce. Also an upright torso. This mimics the impossible dip in a cable form, and of course, carries over to dips, which is an important benefit. With this technique, I dropped down to 70 pounds, then worked back up to 80 pounds over the last few months. Sets usually last 60 to 90 seconds in the 5 to 8 rep range, and you have to microload because bigger jumps aren't possible. This variation is incredibly stable, highly isolated, and based on leverage data, probably engages a long head. See, there are different perspectives on this. Some say dual cables or dual ropes hit the long head through shoulder extension, while others say that the long head has the best leverage when the arms are directly by your side with only forearm motion. As long as you got that, you're good. Kind of like how when you squat and engage the glutes, it shuts off the rectus femoris. So if you're purely isolating the triceps, that might hit the long head more directly. Then you got some other biomechanics guys who say that introducing a little bit of shoulder flexion at the top recruits the long head, similar to a pullover, which also makes sense. So I think they're both right, but to pull the anecdote card, I used to do that for years, way before it was popular, and I always found that my lats took over, and that inevitably led to sloppier form. So I don't feel like it's the best option for torso dominant lifters, unless you really slow down and master that cheating. Regardless, it still worsens the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So if I'm gonna raise my shoulders like that, I'd rather do it on an extension. But even better are pullovers, which naturally feature that function and you don't even have to think about it. I personally feel my long head pumping way more, and it doesn't matter the variation. Pullovers have always been in my program, on and off since I was a teenager. And now, I never drop them because they efficiently work the chest, lats, and long head the triceps, giving an effective indirect stimulus. Whenever I do them, I feel the long head just as much as the primary movers, especially when I'm going to failure or doing multiple sets, including with higher reps. So I'll only consider shoulder movement on pullovers or flat decline extensions where I'm lying down on my back. That's where I'll introduce that motion in a controlled way without using rolling momentum. Otherwise, you can go way too heavy. So if I'm doing strict 60-pound dumbbell extensions with some rolling cheating, I might be doing the 70s. And I don't want to do that, which is a great bench press builder, but for efficiency, I prefer maintaining the strictness of the movement. So with strict triceps pushdowns plus pullovers, already my long head is completely cooked. As for overhead extensions, because we have to talk about them, yes, I mostly did them during my recent bulk using the high to low version. But, and this is a big one, once the weight got heavy enough, they became super unstable and almost impossible to get into the starting position, which is why I eventually dropped them. And imagine, I was heavier. So the only way I could keep doing that movement was by using higher reps, super slow tempos, or treating it like a mechanical drop set. But it just wasn't practical long term. And that's when I switched to the low to high cable extension instead. So the cable is coming from the ground up. Now at first I used dual ropes so I could really spread at the top. But then Jeffrey Verity Schofield, who is the GOAT of long head training, made a good point. If the stretch is the key part of the lift, why not just use one rope? That lets you press the ball ends together, keep a stable grip, and grind at the top without being limited by that spreading force. And it fully stretches the long head at the bottom regardless. So you can push the intensity to an unmatched level with less sticking points. And once that sticking point kicks in, trust me, it's hard. So any little bit of assistance you can get is useful. Sometimes I would even do push presses beyond failure with this. So long head destruction 101, but this made total sense since I had already recommended that for French presses. But best of all, the low cable offers infinite loading potential because it pulls your elbow up and back, thus forcing the long head into a deep stretch while keeping the positioning optimal. And it almost grants you perfect mobility. There is zero balance component. So no matter how heavy you go, stability is never a problem. And that's why the direction of resistance matters. And you should still do overhead extensions, but I think this way is better if you're strong. So this ended up becoming my ultimate cable extension. And I pushed it hard during my cut, taking sets to failure and beyond. And that is when I officially measured my arms at 17 inches at 173, confirming it worked pretty well. Now, after 80 pounds, it does get harder to progress on, and I eventually stopped doing it since it didn't really carry over to my pressing strength as much. given that the long head doesn't contribute a lot there, which doesn't make it bad for hypertrophy, but I wanted a little bit more strength benefits, which led me on to JM presses, which are known to build the bench press. I started doing them again 2 years ago, but had to stop at 205 for reps because somehow they gave me severe biceps tendonitis on my left side that lasted over a year. So when I finally reintroduced jam presses last year, I mostly did them on the Smith machine for consistent form and standardization. And at home, I tried the incline bench version that Jimmy Kolb suggested. But I still prefer the SSB because it's more machine-like in its feeling. So you know what? Instead of fear-mongering myself, I understood that load management is everything, and thus took a slow, cautious approach and micro-loaded my way back up. It took a couple months, but recently, I hit 230 for reps at 162 body weight, which is a lifetime PR. I never even did that when I was in the 180s. That alone shows you how much a JM press carried over to my pressing strength, and why it helped me maintain a strong bench press while on the deep end of my cut. I see it as a direct proxy for close grip bench strength. And I don't care that it doesn't really target the long head. I value its stability, progressibility, and overload potential. Logically, if you can jam press a given weight, you can close grip bench significantly more since your chest and delts can assist. So it gives you that confidence even if you're not specializing on the bench. So it's a great movement for torso dominant lifters whose chests might have failed way before their triceps on pressing variations, and you want a bit more heavy triceps volume in, of course in a specific way. I consider it a strength training staple for carryover, and with the SSB, it is by far the best home option. Speaking of compounds, let me point out the obvious, which doesn't require much explanation, that you should default to a closer grip, which you might as well do if your chest is a strong point, as the indirect stimulus will add up over the years. It's also why I prefer barbell pressing over dumbbell pressing, since the spreading activates the triceps more, and there's no converging, which I want my presses to be more arm dominant. So favor barbells for presses and use a closer grip on everything if your chest is a strong point. It's still gonna grow your chest, but your shoulder health will probably thank you too. That said, to amplify the triceps building on compound movements, I genuinely believe that pressing with accommodating resistance is a game changer. Most lifters avoid it because they don't want to bother with setting them up, but trust me, just 30 pounds of chains or using micro mini bands, which you can buy for $10, is a sweet spot that I found after a decade of conjugate training. It's heavy enough to keep the raw portion challenging while letting the triceps take over where they're strongest, thus perfectly balancing the strength curve. You can do this on overhead press, bench press, and even weighted dips, which makes your compounds more arm biased. That's what you're trying to do. And doing it with the Larson press specifically is brutal, since there's no leg drive and it hits the mid-range even harder, thus destroying your lateral and medial head. And to that, I could absolutely state that my development is on point here. My horseshoe and meat around the elbow is highly developed. That is not a lagging part of my triceps, and I will give credit to this. It's still just my long head that needs a bit more work, and it makes sense. I press pretty fucking heavy. So I've also found that there's nothing better for enhancing your lockout strength. Whenever I take out bands and chains, I see a noticeable decline within a few weeks, because then my chest will start to take over. Again, I was historically very torso dominant. By the way, this is also useful on a cut, where you lose some leverages and have more range of motion at the bottom. Therefore, more muscle damage and weighted stretch. This helps optimize shoulder and chest recovery, since it offsets some of that stretch load. And again, just like the jam press, I don't care if this doesn't work long head. You need to think about how it affects your recovery and other exercises, which means you can push harder on other lifts, like weighted dips, which will probably do so much for you. Which spoils my final compound that I genuinely believe is underrated for torso dominant lifters, but it only becomes special once you're decently strong. Weighted dips. See, when I first started dipping around 15 years ago, my triceps actually responded well. But once I got past the novice phase, it started growing my chest more than anything else. That was the case for years, and I honestly just viewed it as a watermelon peck developer. And it still is. But nowadays, with the kind of loads I'm lifting, dips absolutely hit my triceps hard. I can't deny that. Even with a small amount of forearm bend, the absolute load multiplied by whatever that number may be with the leverages and moment arms makes it feel like a heavy extension every time. Especially when I push my elbows back. I remember Doug Brignoli used to say that a 200-pound man doing bodyweight dips is like hitting 25-pound dumbbell extensions, which he viewed as inefficient. But in my case, if my total weight for reps is 350, then the tricep stimulus must be closer to doing 50-pound extensions, which that's something. For context, I'm doing them with 4 plates for reps at the end of my workout while fatigued, using deep control technique. And even if I do them more quickly, if it's my last compound movement, my triceps are often the limiting factor, especially after doing arm-biased compounds like the close grip Larson press or the AD press with chains earlier in the session. And if you isolated your triceps right before them, even better. Therefore, the overall intensity on the triceps is high. And I do get sore triceps from dips alone. And just to stress, if you isolated your triceps right beforehand, it's going to be even more effective, just like I discussed with the chin-ups. It's the same strategy. You'd be shocked how difficult bodyweight dips can be in that condition. Even adding just 25 to 45 pounds can be too much for most of you. And if you do the high volume route, like trying 5 or 6 sets of 12 to 15 with a minute of rest, your triceps will be annihilated as a finisher. I'm telling you, it's impossible not to feel them. Heck, even decline diamond push-ups can be a tough finisher, which I also believe are super underrated. And again, I used to do those too back in the day. So I love pairing those with dips for hardcore down workouts. That said, it's worth noting that out of all the compound pressing movements, dips might be the only one that actually hit the long head of the triceps. And if that turns out to be true, then that makes it the number 1 press for the upper body. Period. But I'll be waiting on outcome data because we don't have definitive confirmation on that. But I will bet money that it does activate the long head more than any other press. Either way, it's a perfect finisher and is an essential part of my training philosophy. Anecdotally, I vouch for dips as a goated exercise. At the end of the day, building massive arms is all about synergy, not just picking the one best exercise. Stack all those together, train balls to the wall, and those guns will be hugging the sleeves. That is exactly what worked for me after years of struggling, and it's what I'll continue doing for now. It's been a long journey with consistent effort, well thought out programming, and paying attention to recovery while keeping technique decent enough. The best part is, this advice is simple. Most of you can train this way. So all you have to do now is be patient and keep stacking on those micro inches over time. And if you want more arm training videos just like this, comment down below, arm dominant life, and I'll be sure to bring you that next time.